The Independent in the UK has an absolute bombshell of a story here from journalist Robert Fisk. So this story came out on July 23rd. Ask yourself how much coverage, if any, you've seen about this on mainstream media. I traced missile casings in Syria back to their original sellers, so it's time for the West to reveal who they sell arms to. I don't think either NATO or the EU has the slightest interest in chasing the provenance of weapons in the hands of Islamist fighters in Syria or anywhere else in the Middle East. So let me sum up this piece for you. The bottom line is, he goes to an ISIS/Al-Qaeda stronghold in Syria that was recently, I think, defeated by the Syrian government. Note for the record here, does the Syrian government ever get credit when they defeat ISIS or Al-Qaeda? Even if it's just in a given battle, do they ever get credit? No, because the West has their narrative of Assad as the evil butcher, bad guy, terrible in every imaginable way, and therefore he can do no good, but he beats ISIS and it doesn't fit the narrative, so they just don't discuss it. So, but put that point aside. So ISIS defeated in a particular area. Was it Idlib? May have been, may not have been. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember. But he goes into an ISIS stronghold, what used to be like a base of theirs. Robert Fisk does. Looks around, finds U.S. serial numbers on all of the weapons. All of them. So this is a trend. There's a pattern here, and this goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan and the Mujahideen when we decided, hey, in Afghanistan, there are people fighting the Soviet Union, and they're militias. Turns out they were Islamists and jihadists, but hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So arm the jihadists, they'll fight the Soviet Union, and then we all, say, who cares that they're extremist Islamists? Hey, but at least we beat the big, bad, evil Soviet Empire. And what happened? Well, in the case of the Mujahideen with Ronald Reagan, one of the people that we armed and propped up was Osama bin Laden. Now, you might, wow, this is conspiracy theory, Kyle. No, actually, it was literally reported, speaking of the Independent, in the Independent, back then, there were articles that described, Osama bin Laden as a freedom fighter. A freedom fighter. And obviously, he eventually turned his crosshairs onto us, the United States. Now, a similar thing here. U.S. weapons being used by ISIS in Syria, nobody in mainstream media is discussing it. Doesn't exist as far as mainstream. And if they hear somebody like me discussing it, they will immediately dismiss me as if I'm being a conspiracy theorist, even though this stuff is proven. Now, there is an open question, well, how did they get there? Robert Fisk seems to indicate, hey, maybe this is the U.S. arming and funding Saudi Arabia turning around and arming and funding jihadists in Syria, also in Yemen, by the way, against the Shia Houthis in the region. Now, that's certainly possible, for sure. It's also possible that there was direct support. He also seems to indicate that there were arms and funding that went to the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army was a much more secular fighting force against Assad in Syria. Well, over time, the Free Syrian Army kind of dwindled, and there's very few Free Syrian Army people left. So if you think defeating Assad is the most important point, well, then you make some unholy alliances with whoever the hell else is fighting Assad, and it turns out oftentimes it's jihadists. So it's possible the U.S. armed the Free Syrian Army, the Free Syrian Army turned around and armed ISIS, and either way, ISIS has our weapons. Now, do you remember back during the 2016 election when a little Green Party candidate named Jill Stein said, oh, you want to know a terrorism fighting plan? Here, I have one for you. Very simple. Stop exporting arms all over the Middle East. Stop selling arms there, and overnight, not overnight, but maybe over the course of a year or more, you'll have a decrease in the amount of violence by at least 50%. Because we are the ones that actually prop up not only one side of this fight, Oftentimes, we're arming both sides of a given fight. In fact, we've seen it in Syria. You had Pentagon armed and backed rebels fighting CIA armed and backed rebels. I mean, that's like a fucking Monty Python skit come to life in a fucking war. So when she says something like that, it gets no coverage, nobody talks about it, and everybody dismisses her as a kook. But she's right. She's right. If we just stop giving arms and funding to Saudi Arabia and to so-called moderate rebels in Syria, that would absolutely limit the amount of conflict in the region because they wouldn't have as many arms to continue to slaughter each other and kill innocent civilians. And now we know ISIS was armed to the teeth with U.S. weapons. And again, not covered at all in mainstream media in the U.S. See, to me, and in a world that made sense, this would be a giant scandal. Like, oh, wow. So when those super hippie, crazy far leftists say, we create many of our own problems with foreign policy, it turns out they're objectively correct. Because that's the thing, they all scoff, like, oh yeah, really? Fucking hippie, idiot pinko. Really, that's what it is? The U.S. is creating a lot of these problems, and we're conspiracy theorists, and we are. Well, what the fuck? This is what they mean. This is what they mean. We arm the problems either directly on purpose or indirectly, not on purpose, but they still get it and we don't care because we're making a hell of a lot of money with the military-industrial complex. That happens, and then we're like, oh, look at all this violence. We obviously need to invade and keep fighting. What? Again, like a shitty Monty Python skit come to life, but it has to do with war, so it's really not that funny. We're arming ISIS. Nobody's talking about it. We're arming ISIS. Nobody's talking about it. I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. I feel like I'm in the fucking Twilight Zone. To me, this is a huge story. To me, this is something that deserves the fucking, breaking news on the bottom of the screen on CNN and talking heads going, oh my God, this is fucking crazy. Blah. Instead, no, what do we get? Stormy Daniels, Stormy Daniels, Paul Manafort, Robert Mueller investigation, Peter Strzok, not only do they go to they default to the worst possible stories, they cover the reality show angle of the worst possible stories. So it's more about personalities than the issues. You ever notice that? It's not just bad things to cover, which it is, but it's also the personality angle of it and not the substantive issue of it. Well, here we have the polar opposite of that. Very substantive issue about the U.S. arming ISIS, not even a mention. Yet again, that's why you come here.